Hello everybody! JGC Anime here today. We're to review Chain Soldier. So without further ado, let's just hop right into this. So what is the story of Chain Soldier? Basically, we follow our main character Yuki, who is living in a world full of girls with superpowers after they eat these things called peaches. And while he's just living his day-to-day life in this world, he's suddenly brought to this place called Mato, which is actually something that happens quite frequently. And after getting into a bit of a situation with one of the teams that are currently trying to save people from Mato, he ends up getting recruited after one of their members, aka the leader of that team, decides to bring him on using her slave ability to turn him into a type of Mato monster that could help her fight against the other monsters in there. And a bunch of other stuff goes down and stuff like that, but that's just kind of how things start off. But yeah, that wasn't a great summary, but we're just gonna roll with it. So, in terms of spoiler-free thoughts on this show, it's fine. That's just how it is. I was going into this not really expecting much. I heard it was just kind of like an ecchi action harem show. That's what I was expecting going into it. And for what it was exactly what I was expecting. It was just a fine show where it kind of reminded me of some other shows such as like Asteric War or Infinite Stratos, where they're just kind of shows that are trying to tell some kind of story, just something that's there, but there's also a harem in the background that's forming between a bunch of girls who just kind of fall for the MC because why not? And they're usually very hesitant to really interact with these girls romantically or just too oblivious to realize their feelings. And while the obliviousness really isn't there here as much, it's more so that they're always trying to just block those things from really going forward at all. And while I do think there are some fun elements here with the harem aspect, as well as just the edgy and action aspects as well, I wouldn't really say anything in particular stands out massively. In fact, if I had to say anything, it's just fine. However, while I do say that, there are still some elements here in the story that I like. I just really do wish that things were balanced out a bit more. And by balanced, I mean leaning more towards one thing or the other, because they try to be so many different things. Like, as I said, the action, ecchi, harem genre, they try to add all of those things together into one story. And I feel like it would have been better if they just kind of dove into one of those ideas, because they're trying to balance these out. But because they do that, it leads the show to just being bland at times. Now, would I say it's a bad show? No. In fact, I think there are some fun moments here, though there also are times where I think that scenes could have looked a lot better, and the fact that pretty much all the monsters in this show are using CGI in order to move around, it's just that sometimes could look a bit off. It's not super bad CGI, like I've seen bad CGI. Like recently I've been watching The Misfit of Demon King Academy Season 2 Part 2, and the CGI for the dragons in that is just some of the worst CGI I've ever seen. So compared to that, this honestly isn't that bad. In fact, I think some of the animation with the CGI can look quite good at times. Not like in terms of visuals, but in terms of like the way they're animated, they look nice. But even so, there are still some flaws here that grind my gears a little bit. And I do think that while there is some fun stuff here, I just can't find myself getting invested in this show. Like, I sat through the entire first season simply because I figured, you know what, why not? Since season 2 has already been confirmed and it's on its way, I might as well just sit down and get through the rest of the first season and see where things lead. And it just was a fine trip. It wasn't anything in particularly special. It was just entertaining enough where I never got particularly bored, but there were moments where I felt like scenes dragged on a bit. In fact, there are also times where I feel where the plot doesn't really know what it wants to be. Like, I remember how early on they try to give all of the characters some moments with our main character Yuki, and while some of them I think are actually quite good, there are other times where I'm just like, really? You do this one storyline is somehow changing this entire person's thoughts and feelings on a character, which we'll go over more of that in the spoiler section, but I do feel like there are times in this where I can't fully understand why things turn out the way they do. And while I do think there are some fun things, there are also a lot of weird things as well. But yeah. Moving past that for a little bit though, I'd like to talk about the characters a bit, since I'm kind of surprised how little I really care about most of these characters. There is one character who I was surprised actually stood out a bit more this season. I thought they were actually one of the best characters in the show, but I'll talk about that in the spoiler section. But even so, most of the characters, minus 2 of them, were really just not that interesting. In fact, the only ones that really stood out this season were the main character and 2 of his companions in the squad. They were really the only ones who really stuck out to me as characters that I kind of wanted to see more of. It's just most of them don't really have unique, fun personalities that make you think, oh yeah, I want to see more of this person. It doesn't even have to be like fun. It can sometimes just be unique enough that you kind of do want to see where things go for them. But more often than not, most of the characters in this are just your kind of generic traits. And even though there are some villains in this show, some more serious threats and stuff like that, I never really feel like I care that much. Like, I remember in the final battle, they were building up some stuff with like this dramatic villain that hasn't done anything all season. Like this group of villains that wasn't really doing anything besides one of them. And I just didn't care. I legitimately did not care about their arrival, what role they have to play. I still don't know anything about them, and I don't see them as a threat. And I think that's just one of the many flaws this show has going for it. I feel like when they try to be an action show, it's kind of dwindled by the ecchi and harem elements, and whenever they try to do the ecchi or harem moments, it's ruined by the action stuff. It's all just one big circle of they can't really figure out what they want specifically to do. And I think that's the biggest flaw with this show. Like, if it dove and focused into one of the aspects of what this show is, I feel like it would be so much more fun. But because they try to balance multiple different setups, it really just kind of falls apart. At least for me personally. I just think that while Chain Soldier isn't a bad anime, it just doesn't have much going for it in terms of like an actually super interesting story. But that's just me. That's all you can say without spoiling things, so we're skipping to the spoiler section now. Here's a timestamp when the spoilers end. If you have seen the show, I recommend sticking around here my thoughts. But yeah, I just skipped to the answer to get any spoilers. But yeah, if you have seen it, I recommend sticking around here my thoughts. So yeah, I'm going to count from 5 and I'm going to enter the spoiler section. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about that I feel like I need to discuss is one of the few characters that I actually kind of liked in this show and her whole story. And while it is kind of more cliche in a lot of ways, I do think it's one of the more interesting stories. And that is the story of Himari, who ends up having to deal with her sister, who is kind of secretly just really caring about her and stuff like that, but she tries to mock her in order to have her come back to the family household. And basically the sister has the ability to stop time, rewind time, and stuff like that. A bunch of really crazy OP abilities, which it makes you wonder how they're supposed to counteract that when they have this small little tournament archetype thing, a little tournament between the two different squadrons that her sister and her were on. And I was very interested in that plot. I actually found it to be one of the more interesting stories that was in this season, and I actually enjoyed it until the main villain showed up and made everything just kind of uninteresting. Like, I think I was probably one of the only people who watched that whole thing go down, where I was actually more invested in what was happening between the sisters than I was in what happened after that, because you know that you can't really have a tournament between two groups of people and show who wins in the end, because if you do, that would mean one would have to be proven to be stronger. And we can't have that happen yet. We need to kind of just show off what each one has in terms of skill right now. So they just sent in some random generic villain who you think is supposed to die at the end, but nope, turns out they're perfectly fine and alive with their other villain companions. And yeah, that part wasn't the best for me. I didn't really care for it, but other than that, the actual story with Himari and her sister and all that, and how Himari, who originally didn't like Yuki, learned to actually care about him and work with him, stuff like that was nice, even if there are moments with the more ecchi elements due to the fact that the slave ability that she was borrowing from the captain made her do some stuff, because the whole thing with the slave ability that they used to transform Yuki literally gives you the like forced desire to kind of give him a reward even if you don't want to do it. It's just something that happens, and that stuff was just kind of mediocre. I feel like that whole thing with Yuki and the reward stuff was just an excuse to have some more lewd stuff happen in the story. Because if you remove that and just had it be an interesting action harem type show, I feel like it might have been a bit better. But when you try to throw in that ecchi element for no particular reason, it just kind of felt off. Like, it happens so much in the show where we just have these ecchi moments out of nowhere. It's just like, oh, I thought we were in a serious scene, but I guess we're doing this now. And it just sometimes it works, but there are other times it just feels so out of nowhere. Like, I remember in the last plotline of this season where Yuki gets kidnapped by his sister, who's actually been surviving in Mato all this time, right after he is saved by the squadrons. Kyoka, the captain of his group, had to deal with the ability and immediately started licking his fingers, just doing all this lewd stuff, at least for the show standard. And the whole thing just really felt completely out of nowhere. I mean, not completely, but it just felt very off-putting. It's like we were suddenly in this super serious scene, and all of a sudden, oh, shift to lewd scene here now. It's just like, why? Okay, I guess we're doing this now. Why not? Because this is just a thing. This is just a thing we're doing now, I guess. And yeah, those scenes were the weakest part to me. They didn't really add anything. They were just there for the sake of, hey, why not have some slightly more lewd stuff in here? And it's just, it is what it is. It's just there. It's a thing that happens, and I just kind of accept it. I just don't like it that much. I think it's kind of a dumb thing to set up, but I'm not the author. They were the ones who decided to put that little thing in there, and I'll live with it. I ain't gonna complain that much. It's just a thing I didn't care much for, but yeah. Moving past that, though, another thing I want to talk about is how I actually was not a fan of the harem aspect in this show. Like, one thing I've always had a complaint about when it comes to harems, well, two actually, are that, one, the protagonist wins over these girls for very little reason. Like, there are times where you're just like, wait, why is this girl into our protagonist again? And the other is the trait of the MC getting beat up because some other girl was trying to hang out with him or flirt with him and stuff like that, and suddenly he's the one at fault, even though he played no part in that. And both of those problems actually do pop up in this show. The first of which that I have to complain about is this character called Shushu, who in the story is basically just a teasing, prank-like girl who was trying to turn Yuki into her own slave as well through blackmail that honestly was kind of stupid to have set up in the first place, but it is what it is. And all of a sudden, a little hangout session with him and having him help save her, all of a sudden she's now swooning over him and wants to try to make him hers through like secret, sneaky means. And it's just like, really? That was all it took for you to fall head over heels for this guy? Really? That was it? No big, massive emotional impact of him trying to really learn about and understand you. Apparently, all it takes is just, oh yeah, he saved you after all the stuff you put him through and stuff like that, and then you accidentally saw his dong because of stuff that happened in the episode, and it's just like, okay, this is just a thing. And she's not the only one actually among the cast who just kind of fall in love with Yuki out of nowhere. Well, I say out of nowhere, but it's more so just it's not the strongest reason. I feel like every other character who has been kind of romantically interested in Yuki slightly makes more sense there. Besides another character called Tenka, who was introduced a little later on, who also for some reason is really into Yuki because I don't know. I have no idea. She's just suddenly like, hey, could I have him on my squad? I want to have him as my own pet or something like that. And it's just like, what? Really? You're taking this seriously? Why are you so into this man? Why? It makes no sense. It's just, is it because you were slightly surprised by his abilities in battle and all of a sudden now you're like, oh yeah, I want him around all the time now? Like, what was your motivation to suddenly be so into this man? To the fact that literally in the last few episodes, suddenly being able to picture your entire life with him all the way to having his kid. It's just like, dude, how did this girl fall so hard for this man that she's just kind of known? It's just like, why? Why would they do that? It doesn't make much sense, but it is what it is. Harems be harems. It's just a trait that many of these shows suffer from, where they just can't seem to want to really develop the romantic connection. They're just like, yeah, they're just into him now, and that's just how it is. But that just threw me a little bit, but moving past that, another thing I want to talk about is the other problem I had to deal with, where girls would hurt our boy Yuki simply just because of other people's actions, where for some reason in the last remaining episodes, Hyokya decides to punish Yuki for simply just getting into situations he had no control over. Like how he instinctively listened to his sister because that's what he was used to doing, and how Tenka snuck into his room and just tried to wake him up and look at his sleeping face or whatever. And because of that, she starts just hurting him. And I'm just sitting there like, why? He did nothing wrong in these scenarios. it's just something that happened either on instinct or he had no control over. He was sleeping till like moments before when Tenka came into his room. So why is he being hurt for it? What did he do? And of course they have to make it sound like the MC is starting to get used to it and start to actually like it because, you know, it's just a bizarre thing that seems to be happening because why not? But it's just like, why? Why is he getting hurt for something he had no control over, or it was just something that he was just well aware that was in his mindset? It's just like, why do you blame him for all this? Why is he being punished for it? And I hated that. And I'm worried that that might be something that happens in the story going forward because I don't like it. It's dumb. He doesn't deserve to be hurt for this, but overall, it's just something I wanted to complain about. I just didn't like it that much, but yeah. Moving past that, the next thing I want to talk about is one of my biggest problems with the story, and that is the lack of real development. Because at the start of the story, minus the fact that somewhat of a romantic connection grows between some of these girls in the story, other than that, Yuki and all of them are pretty much the same throughout the whole season. In fact, even in the final episodes, the most drastic thing that changes is that now Yuki's sister wants to go find her friends who were kidnapped by the main bad guys. And that is the most drastic thing that had happened by the end of the season. Other than that, basically nothing else changed. All the girls still act the same way they did before, besides Kimari, who has gotten used to seeing Yuki around and not treating him as horribly anymore. And it's just, it felt like nothing had changed. It was like it stuck to the status quo and didn't really try to alter too much besides very minor plot beats. And I just didn't care for it that much. I just was a bit disappointed because I was really hoping that maybe the way the end of the story was going, I was really hoping for maybe a big development that would change the entire course of the story. But the most dramatic thing we did was have the sister's friends kidnapped, and the main thing that drove Kyoka to be a soldier has now been eradicated, and that's literally all that really happened. Other than that, everything's the exact same as it was before. No changes. And that's something that a lot of these stories have a problem with when it comes to harem action shows, where more often than not, they won't try to develop the romances or the characters too much, because if they try to do that, then they won't have a story that they can drag on for a continuous amount of time. And it's just the same case here, where I feel like practically nothing has really changed since the beginning and end of the story. Even so, I think there are some things there though. I still think there are some things there that are fun to watch. Like, I really enjoy how this one character called Nei is kind of supportive of everyone. I'm also glad that they do not try to pull anything with her because, you know, it'd be really freaking weird and it would just make me uncomfortable. But basically, she is a highlight of this show actually, just because seeing her try her best to support Yuki and be a good, as she calls herself, a senpai to him, that was nice. That was kind of a nice thing, having him get some support after all the crap he's had to go through with the other three girls. Just seeing someone there to support him was a really nice thing, and I like that. It made me feel glad that Yuki had at least someone there for him. But moving past that, overall, the show isn't awful, but I really don't think it's phenomenal. I think it's just a show that doesn't add or change much to its original concept. It just kind of does stuff, has the girls fall for the protagonist because why not, and just has some ecchi stuff thrown in there for no particular reason. Honestly, if you cut it out, not much would really change. The story would still play out the exact same, minus a few minor plot beats. And yeah, it's just there. It's a show that I neither regret watching, nor do I think it was worth spending every single moment I had actually watching the show. It was just a show that exists. It's a show that never really added or took away anything from its story, and it feels like it's definitely just trying to do whatever it wants. It doesn't really care much about telling a massively insane story, but it is what it is. Overall, it's just a decent story. Nothing more, nothing less, and I wouldn't say it's phenomenal, it's just decent. So, yeah. That's all I have to say, so we're at the conclusion of this video. One of my final thoughts? Overall, I think that Chain Soldier is fine. It is okay, the plots are okay, the setups are okay, the characters are okay, and that's all there is to it. Nothing super particularly massively special about it. It is just a fine show that I'll check out season 2 and see how things go from there, but I don't know how much further I want to see where things go with the story, because if things don't start to change and start to get more interesting, I don't know how much more I'll stick around for. But yeah, overall, I give Chain Soldier a 6 out of 10. not too bad, but really could be a lot better. And yeah, that's all I really have to say, and thank you all for watching. If you're new to the JGC Anime channel, don't forget to subscribe. I was looking at Anime Fans the channel, and I will see you all around. Peace!